Hello there, and welcome to a short video that's going to cover some of the basics of working with Unity for the level design course. Specifically, the project that I have open is the Scraps game project that everyone's going to be using. So, first of all, the Unity layout that I have open at the moment is the default layout. If you wanted to select it, it's 2 by 3 from up here. Uh, this this default layout has a lot of windows that are available that I'm going to try to cover a little bit. So up here at the top is the scene window. This is essentially the window that you are going to be able to work on the game project and move objects around, interact with things through the editor. Down here at the bottom is the game window. This is how the game will look when it's actually running. So when you hit play, you can actually see it move down here and see the difference. So the bottom window is what the game actually looks like. The top window is the editor. Okay, over here is the hierarchy. This hierarchy is the scene hierarchy. It shows you what all objects are located inside of this world that we have open right now. And in here we can put in multiple scenes that can be open at the exact same time. But right now I just have the Scraps toy box open, and this is kind of a prototyping space that we can use to work on the project. If you don't have that open, over here in the project window, you can go to the Scraps scenes folder, and then in here we've got the toy box. Now this layout for this project window is not my favorite. So if you wanted to set this to show not 2 panels but just one, which will include all of the folders and files in the same one, you can go to this little drop down and select 1 column layout, and now I can see all of the files underneath the folders. And then there's the Scraps toy box. Okay, so I'm going to reorganize some of these windows just so I can make use of this space on my computer. I'm going to drag the project window down here and dock that. And then I don't need to see the game window while I'm working. So I'm going to put the game window next to scene and then switch to scene. And now we can have all of that space to work with. The game window, next time we play, I want to make sure that this screen actually looks like the correct resolution. So up here where it says free aspect, I'm going to switch that to 16 by 9, which is the widescreen resolution. Alright, so if you've noticed, I'm moving around the camera in the scene window. If you hold down the right mouse button, you'll see a little eyeball icon come up. When that happens, you can move the camera in and out and around in the scene by pressing the WASD keys. It just creates kind of a fly around camera. If you hold shift, it'll go faster. And then if you ever get lost, you can select something, and then if I have it selected here, you can hit F and that'll focus. I tend to use this more than scrolling, because scrolling changes how the camera views things. So you can always hit F to focus on something again to then reset the camera. Alright, so in here I'm going to go ahead and create a cube. A cube is just, it'll be a basic game object that we're going to kind of step through some things with. So I'm going to go to Game Object, 3D Object, and Cube. And then here we have a cube. Right now it's kind of over here in the corner. When moving things around, you've got this transform gizmo selected. I have it up here selected. We're working with the pivot point, which is in the center of this object right now. And then we're on local space for what we're working with. Global would be the, let me try to explain that better. So local space would be if you see like this toy box game object, everything under here is in local space to the toy box because they're all child objects of it. If I were to select global, then I would be moving things around as if they were in the scene. So what I want for this is to be on the global, the global transform of that, and I'm going to move it around from its pivot point. When you're moving things, you can hold control to snap to grid points. So if you wanted it to move from, as you can see, the shadow moving from grid to grid, or I can hold V, and V will let me snap corners to corners. So if I wanted to click on the middle of this square here, I could snap it to a corner. Up to you what you want to do with it, but just giving you some of the basics. So this cube has specific properties that the inspector can show. The properties of the cube are, or rather the things that the inspector is going to show for the cube are components that make up what this object is. So this cube is actually just a default game object that has a transform, and the transform lets us know what its position is, if it's rotated, and if it has any sort of scaling information on it. The next things that actually define it as a cube are the mesh filter, which has a cube in it at the moment. That makes it look like a cube. The mesh renderer, that actually renders the cube to the screen so we can see it. And then the box collider at the bottom is how we actually collide with this thing. So if I duplicate this cube and move it over, and then on this duplicate, I'm going to strip it of everything that it had before. So the box collider, if I right click and remove it, now I can't collide with this anymore. I'm just going to pass right through it. If I remove the mesh renderer, then we can't see it anymore. It's a cube still, but it just doesn't exist. And then finally, if I remove that, it is just a basic game object. All it has is this position, and that's it. So whenever you create an object, all of these game objects are based on these things that are attached to it. So for this cube we've got, I'm going to duplicate it. Control D will duplicate it if you want, or you can right click on it and duplicate, just to make a separate one. Now this one I'm going to turn into what we call a trigger volume. And the trigger volume, we're going to allow this character to carry the one into the other. So on this, let's rename this object. It's cube 1 right now. I'm going to call this trigger volume. And then I'm going to change the box collider to a trigger, just like that. And then I don't need the mesh renderer for a trigger, I guess. Or rather, we should probably make it semi-transparent. So on here, I'm going to, let's go into materials. And the default material right now is just the plain white. In this project, we have materials that already exist for you. So if we go to tools and then materials, we need something transparent. So all of these alpha prototyping materials are transparent. I'm going to go ahead and put the yellow one on it. Okay, and now it's semi-transparent and we can see it. And then we can change the size of this so we can put that other object in here. So this will be our trigger. Okay, and then we're going to bring that cube into that space. All right, so this cube, in order to move it, we need to turn this into one of the types of objects for this project, which is a gravinal object. The gravinal objects in the Scraps project allow the character to hold down their left mouse button and lift objects and move them around. So we're going to just go into tools and then drag from scripts the gravinal object script to it. And then it automatically puts a rigid body on it. The rigid body is how Unity allows physics to be to take over. So this object should bump around and move and whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and just hit play. And then automatically the cube has fallen to the ground. I can push it because it's got physics. And if I hold the left mouse button, I can now pick it up and I can put it inside of this. Now notice the cube doesn't actually go inside. It's sitting on the outside of it. That's because whenever you want to do a trigger volume for this project, you want to make sure that its layer is set to ignore raycast. So the character has something called a raycast that shoots out to find out where to position that object. So we just want this trigger volume to have ignore raycast on that. And now when we hit play, we can pick up this object and push it into that spot. So this now goes inside, and we have taken the one cube and put it inside of the other one. Okay, so that's great and all, but unless we have something that happens when this thing happens, then it doesn't really do anything for us. So on this trigger volume, I'm going to create we're going to add a script to it. And the script is going to allow us to count how many objects are in it. I'm going to make this, I'm going to change this scale to be something a little more consistent. So just 5 by 5 by 5. Okay, I'm going to set it on top of this space over here. And then we're going to add a component, and let's call this, I'm going to put my initials in front of it because it's my script, DAM, and then underscore, and we'll call it trigger volume. And this is just an example. And then we're going to hit new script and create and add. When that's created, you see that it populates right down here in the folders. You should always have a folder built for you while you're working. So I'm going to right click on assets and create a new folder. Let's put my name on it. So Derek Marinowski. And then I'm going to drag my script into my folder. Alright, so this trigger volume needs to count how many objects are put inside of it. So I'm going to open up trigger volume by double clicking on it. And now that Visual Studio has loaded, let's move it to the right screen. And welcome to C# scripting. In here, there's some default functions that appear. We've got start, which it says start is called before the first frame update. And then update is called once per frame. None of these things are going to be necessary for us right away. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove these. By removing these, I haven't removed the ability to use them. I'm just keeping my script clean. So what I want to do is have a way to count how many objects are inside of this volume. In order to do that, I need a number to count with, because the only way to store data in scripting is to have something to store data in. So I'm going to make a public integer, and let's call this count num. And we'll set it to 0 for its default value. Now, because I made it public, it's going to show up here on the inspector when it compiles. And then we can see count num right here and 0. Now, in order to get this to change in the script, I need to check to see if something's happening. It's a trigger volume, so we're going to have two functions and or methods. The correct term is method in C#, but those names are used interchangeably sometimes. So we're going to create, or rather put in one of the monobehavior methods, which is onTriggerEnter. So void onTriggerEnter. If you hit enter here, it'll just populate this out. Notice that it puts private in front of it. If you don't put an access level of sort in front of it, then it automatically assumes that it's private, so it's just going to put that there. It's void, which means that it returns no values. It's just going to run. It's not going to pass out any sort of information. And then onTriggerEnter is what we want to check, which is essentially the first frame that something steps into the trigger volume. And then it's going to collect a collider, which is whomever stepped into the volume, and it's going to put it in a variable called other. So other can be anything that starts this. That's going to contain that information. So if anything steps into the trigger, I'm going to go ahead and increase count num to show how many things are here. So count num plus plus, and that's going to increase it. And then if I want things to go down when it exits, let's go ahead and do private void on trigger exit, and then we'll do count num minus minus. And just like that, we've got some sort of functionality that we can check. So in Unity, I'm going to go ahead and create a duplicate. Let's duplicate this 3 times. So we've got 3 cubes that I can pass into this box here. I'm going to leave this up so we can see the number change, and I'm going to hit play. All right, so I'm gonna, right now it says count num is 0. I'm going to pick up this box and put it in. Notice that count num is now 1. Move this in. Count num is now 2. If I drag one out, it's now 1. If I walk into it, it's now 2. We actually got 3 because of the gravity, the grav well thing is stepping into it. That also has a rigid body on it and a collider. So anything that has those on it, that's what's counting. So we can be more specific about what we're looking for, but that is allowing us to test those things. Okay, so if we have one that counts and you were to duplicate it, they're both using the same script. And now I can look at 2 different ones and see how many are in each. So if I hit play, right now I have the one on the left selected. If I put this in here, we'll see that it has 1, but if I select the other one, it's got 0. So both of them are using the same script, but they're 2 independent objects that are doing whatever they need to do. So with that in mind, we're going to create a new object that is going to display how many objects are in each volume. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new cube. Let's go ahead and do game object, 3D object, cube. I'm going to move it up with the transform, hold V to snap corner to this corner, and then just position it in between these 2. And I'm going to use this cube as a point of interaction so that I can display this information. So this will be a volume manager. Essentially, it's just going to look at these 2 trigger volumes, and then I've got the 2 trigger volumes right here. So on volume manager, I'm going to add a script, initials DAM, volume manager, and then add this. Visual Studio immediately pops up because something's happening with script, but that's okay. So this one, I'm going to drag it into my folder. And now that it's there, we need this script to look at the other 2. So on the volume manager, I'm going to create a variable, but the variable is not going to be like an integer or float or anything. I'm going to use the script I just created as the type of data that I want to store. So I'm going to make a public DAM trigger volume. We'll call this volume 1. And then we'll do public DAM trigger volume 2. And so with those 2 slots created, if we look at the inspector again for this object, I'm going to wait for it to compile. So if we look at these, we see these 2 different slots. So this will only take a type of trigger volume script that we've created. You can't drag anything else into there. If you were to create just for example, if you were to create a game object, test go, if I made a variable for a game object, then I could take anything that was a game object and put it into this slot. So if we go on test go to the little circle at the end here, this will show me that everything in the scene is allowed to be put into this slot. Whereas if I look at the trigger volume, only the trigger volume objects have that component, so it'll allow me to put that in there. So let's select 1. and then I'll get the second one. Now, putting things into these slots using the little circle is not what you want to do. You can always drag it from the scene hierarchy into this slot to assign it. But you can't drag things that don't belong into those slots. As you notice, I can only put it to the bottom. So let's go ahead and get rid of this variable because we're not going to use that. Clear that up. And now we've got two trigger volumes that we can ask questions. I'm going to put we're going to make a custom method that is going to display the information from this script over here. So I've got this public our public integer count num. We're going to reference that over here. I'm going to get rid of this space down here. All right, so I'm going to say public void because we're going to return no value, but what we're going to use this for is to display a message. So I'm going to say display count. And then in display count, I'm going to take the two volumes that I have stored, and we're just going to put up a debug message that shows what's in there. So let's do debug.log, and then what we want to do is create a string. So we're going to use quotations, and then inside of this, we're going to say volume 1, and then a space, and then I'm going to add volume 1 dot the count num, and then we're going to continue this the string along. So we're going to do that one. Actually, let's do it separate first. So debug.log volume 1 and then the count, and then we'll do debug.log volume 2 and then the count. Count num. There you go. All right, so I have two messages that are going to display when we call this display count. Now, just to show a test, I'm going to I'm going to put update back in here and say void update. Update runs once per frame, as it said before. So we're going to check for input and then display this message. So we're going to go if input get key down. So it'll be the very first time it's pressed down. We're going to look for key code E for the E key. And when we press E, I'm going to show display count. So we're just going to call it here, display count, open close parenthesis, and end the line. This means that anywhere that I am in the scene, if I press the E key, it's going to run this. And I'm just doing this as an example. So here we are. Let's go ahead and hit play. And then when I print these debug messages, they're going to show up in the console. So we're going to have to pop the console out. I'm going to hit tab while it's running to get my mouse out and go to Window and General and Console. Let's move it here. Whenever you see a yellow warning, that's not an error that you have to take care of, but it is something that should be cleaned up eventually. I'm going to go ahead and hide them for now, so we can just see the messages come up when they're ready to do so. So let's go ahead and put 1 over here and the 2 on the other one. And if I press E over here, you see volume 1 has 1 and volume 2 has 2. If I take 1 and move it over and then hit it again, volume 1 has 2 and volume 2 has 1. Now you wouldn't want an interaction like E to happen everywhere in the scene. What you want is for to know if the player is actually next to this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and put a void on trigger enter, and then a private void on trigger exit, and then we're going to track to see if the player is nearby. So public bool, a boolean is a true or false, and we're going to check to see if is here, which is if the player is here or not. So in here, we need to see if it's the player. The player has a tag that is on the player's game objects called player. So if we say if other tag, compare it to player, if that is true, then it's the player. So we're going to say is here is true. And then we want the opposite down here. Or not the opposite, rather, but we want, if it's the player, we want this to be false because they're leaving. And now, when we go to check for this E key, we want to say is here, compare it to true, and then check for input. This way, if this is false, this is not going to be checked. Let's go ahead and head back in here. I'm going to have to add something to that object. So now that we have is here, we need this to be a trigger volume. So I'm going to duplicate this box collider by going to the little gear and select copy component. And then I'm going to select the gear again and do paste component as new. And then I can hit is trigger. And then we'll change size to, let's do 3, 3, and 3. So that'll give us a little a volume around this cube that we can stand in. And then if we have a volume that we can stand in, we're going to have to make sure that it is ignore raycast. However, now we've got a collider in here that we want to be able to bump into, but we don't want it to cause issues with how the player interacts with things. So the collider here on this object is going to cause an issue like that. So if we made an empty game object under it, and we use this as all the scripted interactions, like the trigger, we can then copy that stuff from here to the other one. So I'm going to go to the volume manager, select copy component, go to trigger, and let's paste it over here. So there's all of the information still filled out. And let's go get this box collider, copy the component, go to trigger, and paste it. Now we've got the trigger and the volume manager script on its own object. I can then safely remove these from here. And now this layer is default, but this trigger I can set to ignore raycast. And now we won't have any issues bumping into that. So let's try this again. I'm going to hit play. And then select a box, put it in here. Select another one, put it in here. And if I walk up to this object and press E, let's make sure we have the console open and clear out our old variables. If we select clear on play, the next time we play it should clear stuff out. E says volume 1, there's 1, and volume 2, there's 1. If we pass this in here, press E, now we've got, this is set to collapse as well. If I undo collapse, clear it, now we can get the correct messages. So there you go. Now we have an interaction that requires the player to be next to it, because if I press it over here, it doesn't display anything. If I walk up to it, you'll see it displayed. Now, you can do that all through scripting, or we actually have an interactive object script that will handle some of that stuff for you, and will also display some feedback. So on this object, if I wanted this to use that interactive object instead, if you go to Tools and then drag out Interactive and place it right here, this interactive script has a Unity event on it, and it says on interact, and then there's nothing here. In our manager, if I pop that back open, notice that if we are here and I press the E key down, then it's going to display count. If I remove this update, and I even remove the ability to check if the player is here or not, and just leave display count, on the interact or interactive script, if I go ahead and add an event, this event is now looking for an object. I'm going to drag the exact same object that we're currently on into this slot. and now you're going to see no function lit up. If I select it, you'll see the volume manager is right here in this list because it sees the anything that is public or any parameters that are available to you, including the function we've created, which was display count. So if I leave display count here, then if I walk into this volume and it's going to tell me to press E, that it'll run that just like we were doing before. But now we're not doing it in the script. We're using this interactive thing instead. So I'm going to hit play and show you. So if I walk up to the box, it says press E to interact. If I press E, the message shows up. So 0 and 0. If I walk away from this object and try to press E, it knows that we need to be next to it. So now I can put these boxes in. 1, 2, 3. Press E, and now it displays them again. So I've showed you how to do it with events and how to do it with script. The last piece of this is I don't want to show it in the console anymore. I'm going to show it in the actual game. So right here we're just doing a debug.log display. If I wanted to display a message in the game project that you're working in, which is Scraps, there is a message system that you can access simply by typing scraps_message system. And then if we put a period after that, we'll see a bunch of stuff. We're looking for instance. Instance is the one instance of this message system that exists in the game. Then new message. And new message has a from for who sent the message, the body, whatever the message is, and then a message type. Message type is going to be how it displays in the little chat box or message window that's in the game. So let's send a new message from volume manager. The message is going to say, we'll do volume 1, put a space, then we're going to add volume 1's count num, and then let's make this all one line. So we're going to add another one. So plus, open it up, space, volume 2, space, then add volume 2 dot count num. And we're just appending a bunch of strings and information together to make one message. And then let's just close this off with a period. Now a comma, and now we're at the Scraps message type. These highlight as you move through filling it out. If you hit space, it'll just jump to Scraps message type, hit enter, then period, and you get bad, emote, standard, and system. I'm going to go ahead and just do a standard message. If you want to know more about this, you can go back to the Scraps game design document, and it covers that in all the in length of anything you're trying to see. But let's end this line. And so this line is really long. If you want to make this fit on one screen, you can actually move this down by just hitting, let's go enter here. And notice it didn't stop this from working. The line ends at this semicolon. So if you wanted to separate this down and be like, you know what, I want this to go here, and I want this one to go here, and then finish it out, totally fine. That's still going to work. It just may look weird to you. So let's save this and then go back to Unity. And now when I interact with this, it's going to display it to the game window. So I'm going to go ahead and hit maximize on the game window so that this will go full screen and we'll see all of it in action. Play. And now here we are in the project. Let's go ahead and walk up to the box, press E to interact. It says volume manager, volume 1 is 0 and volume 2 is 0. If I move 1 into here, and 1 into here, and 1 into here. Press E. Now volume 1 is 1 and volume 2 is 2. So there you have it. We took a very basic project and then ramped it up to a fully working scripted system that can pass information to the message system, and you can have the character actually interact with things in the level and whatnot. This should help explain how to get objects to talk to each other, but also how to use the Unity event system to do the exact same thing that you would do in script. So thank you for watching, and I hope that was very eye-opening and fun to kind of witness and see happen. Thank you.